Hello, welcome to or welcome back to How to Change the World, a podcast for people leading change in their work, their lives, and their community. We provide stories of inspiration as well as tools and resources to help you advance change on the local level, no matter what sector or issue you care about. Today, I'm joined by John Webster, who is very active in his local community here in Arizona and really passionate about driving change on the local level. He is a business owner. He owns a small business called Executive Millwork Cabinetry here in Arizona. And he also has become very actively involved in politics and community activation, I would say, in his local area. And so we jump in today about his story, where he came from, his long career in the military, and what really inspired him to start getting involved, and all of the lessons that we have learned or are learning from the most recent presidential election. John was a lifelong Republican who was really inspired to get involved electing candidates who were more in line with his values and what he was looking for in a candidate in the last few presidential cycles. And we really talk about what happened in the election, what are the lessons learned, and what are the implications for those of us who are trying to and passionate about driving positive change in our local communities. Without any further ado, here is my conversation with John Webster. John Webster, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
I am so grateful and appreciative of your time and really excited to talk to you today and your perspective on the world and how we change it. So can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I currently own a millwork company. And millwork is a construction word for anyone that works with wood. So we work for general contractors. We build countertops, cabinets, any architectural feature with wood. But this is somewhat recent. I bought the company back in, 6 years ago. And previous to that, most of my life I spent in the military. I was a Air Force officer and retired in 2012. So this is kind of a second career really for me.
And what was it that inspired you to buy a millwork company? Childhood dream?
Actually, no, it's actually a pretty good story. You talked about your husband at ASU. When I retired from the military, I was teaching political science at the Air Force Academy. But my wife she was from Arizona. She said, "Hey, let's move back to Arizona." And I did not see myself getting back into academia. So I worked for a few years for an engineering company that had a contract with Boeing. And I had a little bit of expertise on how to deal with Boeing just from my military days, but not much on how to effectively run a program. So long story short, I enrolled in the Executive MBA program at ASU to get some of those skills that I was missing. And one of the classes there was entrepreneurship. And the class spent half the time on how to buy an existing business and improve it. And so for a class project, I knew my neighbor owned a company. And so I said, why don't I do evaluation of your company for this class project? He said, sure. And that's the company I ended up buying like a year and a half.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Quit my other job at the engineering company, and we've been doing this.
What a cool example of how random life can be. For a class project, and it shaped your entire career and life.
Yes, indeed.
And what originally motivated you to get into the military?
Well, my father served during the Korean War in the Air Force, and so I had that in the back of my mind. And then when I was getting ready to look at colleges, it was actually my brother said, "You should look at the service academy. It kind of fits what you want to do." And so I ended up applying for and getting admitted to the Air Force Academy, which is just outside of Colorado Springs. And then once I was in there, I found out, hey, you come to school here so you can be in the Air Force. And I never thought I'd stay, but it was a great experience.
What were some of your biggest takeaways?
How important the United States is on the global scene. So I spent time overseas in Europe, in Bosnia with NATO peacekeepers, in Moldova doing a partnership for peace with former Soviet countries, in Finland when we were trying to build our relationship there in preparation for them to join NATO. And then I was in England for 3 years. And all those times, I could see how the United States, just because of its size, right? It's a large economic force, but also a large military. When you combine those two, it really can play a force for good in partnership, right, with our allies and countries who are looking, a country like Moldova and Bosnia who are struggling, or a country like Finland and England who, they're just looking for someone to join them with good causes. So that's probably the biggest takeaway.
And when did your interest in politics originally spark?
That I've always had.
Okay.
I was a Reagan Republican back when I was a teenager. And in fact, just kind of an odd story. So I was stationed in Hawaii. There's a lot of military bases there. One is on Oahu next to the Honolulu airport called Hickam. So I was stationed there and was deployed to Bosnia, which obviously is on the other side of the globe, and went there for several months working with the Russians. Actually, we were doing this peacekeeping operation. On the way back, I had a layover in Los Angeles, and when I was over in Bosnia, one of the sources of news we received was a newspaper called Stars and Stripes. And it's a newspaper published by the Department of Defense for the Department of Defense when you're deployed. And in that newspaper was a picture of Ronald Reagan. This was 1997, so he'd already been out of office for a while, meeting with a bunch of Girl Scouts. And I thought, oh, and it talked about he would meet with them he met with them in his office in Los Angeles. So I wrote a letter, said, hey, I have a layover in Los Angeles. It'd be great to meet you. I'm here in Bosnia, working with the Russians, blah, blah, blah. And lo and behold, his secretary called and said, sure, we'll set it up. So I got to meet with Ronald Reagan when I was a young lieutenant in the Air Force and had just a 15-minute one-on-one office visit with him. So I was always.
That's awesome. What an incredible story. What did you talk about?
He asked, what was I doing in Bosnia? And I talked about the Russians, and I gave him a little gift, and just, he was very kind and warm individual. We took a picture, and what was interesting is the person after me was one of his a former Secret Service guard or personnel agent, I guess, Secret Service agent. And he was just in that office meeting. There was this period of time he was just meeting with people like me and people from his former life who wanted to meet him.
That's awesome. And did you grow up in a political family?
Yes. My mom was the secretary of the local Republican Party in our small town. And my dad ran for mayor. Lost, but he ran for mayor a couple of times. So both of them were active.
So politics is kind of in your blood. It's something you've been around.
Yes.
And it sounds like you at least started life and maybe a big portion of your life as a pretty firm Republican. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. All the way until 2016.
So talk me through that journey for you and what happened in 2016.
So 2016, and if you remember, it's a very crowded field. So
in the Republican primary.
In the Republican primary, it's Obama's last. No, let's see. Was it? Was Obama
No, was
finishing? Yeah. So it was open. There wasn't an incumbent. Crowded presidential. Hillary Clinton was the forerunner on the Democratic side, and the Republican side, it was wide open. And there was a candidate, John Kasich, who was the governor of Ohio, who I thought was well qualified, well spoken, would be a good candidate. But there were others. Ted Cruz was in there, Marco Rubio was running, and Donald Trump. And I've talked to other people who similarly, when they learned to listen to Donald Trump or watched him, and they could tell this guy should not be trusted, right? There was something off. And that's what happened with me. I listened to his announcement speech when he came down the elevator, and that whole kind of off the cuff, this is why I'm running. I thought, boy, we want to make sure we don't get what he is our nominee. And then he was. So that in 2016, I could not vote for Hillary Clinton, right? I was a Republican, right? So I could not vote for her. So in 2016, I voted for an independent by the name of Evan McMullen, who ran. And he was I think a retired former CIA agent out of Utah. And he had tried to get officially on the ballot here, but didn't gather enough signatures. So I just wrote his name in.
And then you were very active in this last election, Republicans for Kamala. And I believe you also were very active in your support of Ruben Gallego, who ran for the Senate in Arizona as a Democrat. And so what was your path from 2016, voting for an independent, to being not only voting for Kamala, but investing a lot of time, energy, and resources into promoting her to other people?
Sure. So in 2020, before that was in 2020, when Donald Trump was running again, I thought, I got to be more proactive. And I'd kind of come around to this, from the Republican who would never vote for a Democrat. In 2020, I could see I was going to vote for whoever ran. And because I just couldn't imagine that the Democrats could put forward a candidate that wouldn't be better qualified than Donald Trump. So then it was Joe Biden. And I actually had met Joe Biden when I was in the military. I was stationed in Finland for 3 years with the U.S. Embassy there. And he had come by on a vice presidential visit and then had a special meeting with the families that were over there attached to the embassy. So it was just a short meeting, but I knew, at least it's interesting just having a face-to-face and chatting with someone for a few minutes. Very personable guy. And while I didn't agree with the policies, my sense was he was in fact someone who would respect and follow the Constitution and a person of character. So I decided, wow, I think I'm going to support him, but I'm not exactly sure how. And then someone here in Gilbert, Arizona had started a PAC, and they called it this long name, Republicans Who Believe in Treating Others with Respect. Have you heard of it?
No, I'm just laughing at the name of something that is a sentence. It's a great name.
It doesn't even have an acronym. You couldn't even shorten it. But I knew that he and his wife started it. He's a retired judge here in Arizona. And he designed this sign that said Arizona Republicans for Biden. And it has this part of the state flag. So I knew him personally, but a friend of mine he had been showed me this interview that the name is Dan Barker had done on CNN. So I reached out to him, and I spent 2020 helping him put up these signs. And it just became like a political sign. It was almost a comedy. You'd put up a sign in the morning and it'd be down in the afternoon. these Arizona Republicans for Biden signs. So on my way to work, I would have a group of signs. I'd put them up, and then I'd see how many were taken down. And then the next day I'd put them back up. And then Saturday mornings I was putting them up around, and it just felt good to do that. I felt like I was doing something. So 2024 comes, and Dan, who had led this pack, he said, "Hey, I need you to take a larger role and join our leadership team." So I became the treasurer, and someone else he was the president and vice president. So the three of us would meet weekly and talk about how we're going to try to influence this election. And we actually had printed new Arizona Republicans for Biden signs. And then the debate happened. And we started, we had an email list of about 1,000 people. So we would have these meetings once a month, just trying to rally folks and fundraise, because our idea was, instead of just doing signs, we were going to do billboards. We were going to go high, because it can't be taken down. So that's what we did. So we got to that point, and the debate happens. Biden drops off in Harris, and then and it was interesting. It just created a buzz. Okay, here we go. This is a candidate that we all can support, and we changed our sign immediately, and had a big fundraise, and off we were off and running. And the week of the Democratic convention, we bought our first billboards around the valley. We had 50 billboards up that said Arizona Republicans for Harris.
And it sounds like for you that character, trust, and integrity are more important than specific policy positions. Is that right?
Right. And part of it is foreign policy. But yeah, here's I think what I saw just from my military perspective. The president's real power is limited on domestic policy because of just how the Constitution is set up, with needing to push legislation through Congress, and then have the judicial kind of guard you on what, be another check on whether it's constitutional. But on foreign policy, if you have any type of global crisis or even a domestic crisis, you want a strong leader, someone who inspires people to follow him or her. And people may be other countries, or it just may be your own citizens. And you generally, you depend on that leader being someone who has the moral character to do the right thing for the country, not for their own self-interest, not for their own glory or anything else. It's, you want them to have the moral character to make decisions on behalf of that reflect the values of our country. That was not Donald Trump. And I don't, even the most ardent, well, I shouldn't take that back. There are people that think that. But it's, the actions of January 6th and so forth show that he's not that type of leader. And so that was the driving force, and people could talk about, and I'm a small business owner, they could talk about economic policy, you could talk about social policy, all those pale in comparison to having someone with the moral character to be the leader of this country.
And, we know at this point that Donald Trump won every swing state. He won the popular vote, and he made gains in most demographic groups across the country. There were only a couple of groups that really voted for him in a majority. And so what that tells me is that a lot of people are using a different framework for making decisions.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that?
Well, my own understanding of why that happened or how I reconcile it is anecdotal from talking with people that voted for him, or I guess it's reading account, firsthand why they voted for him. And it seems to be two things. One, Kamala Harris was her painted as this radical liberal and that scared people. Republicans, conservatives, some independents. And the second was this idea that our personal economic well-being would be better off with Donald Trump. And I think what happened with inflation, now, and then that's a long topic of what the drivers were, but inflation did hurt most folks in the middle lower economic range, and the idea that Donald Trump would somehow be a better solution economically when folks find that things are just too expensive or more expensive, that narrative just took hold, whether or not it was supported by empirical data or not. And then it goes back to, all the things I feel, such as, foreign policy and leadership and character and defending the Constitution. That is all secondary for the person that tries to avoid politics for 364 days, but on that one day they're going to go vote. Mm. So that's how I reconcile it. I'm curious to hear if I know this is what you think.
I think there's a million reasons. People I know who didn't want the result that happened. Some have consumed like every news story or podcast they can about what happened and what the breakdown was. And then other people like can't deal with it and don't want to read any of that. And I'm probably fallen somewhere in the middle. And so of all of the reasons, all of the things that I've listened to, the list of reasons gets really long. The two things that you mentioned are top of the list. And then I think that race and gender played an undeniable role. And in terms of the candidates and people just not being comfortable voting for a woman of color for whatever reason. But if I summarize it all, I think that this was an election that was about brand, and that these two candidates and everything they represent, Kamala and the Democrats had a branding issue that was the seeds of which were sown long before this election. And there wasn't a single thing that Kamala could have done about it. And in fact, I think she ran a phenomenal campaign and did like the very, very best that she could. And then for whatever reason, it's not a brand I agree with, but for whatever reason, right now, the prevailing brand of Trump is that he is for the everyman. And I use the word man intentionally. And that brand is really resonating, even if I personally don't think that his policy positions actually are going to bear that out. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, what do you think of that analysis, I guess?
That's probably true. So, and what's interesting is when we talk, the bigger pictures, we were always wondering, okay, how can we reach out to the people we feel like we can move or make a difference? So we started off with these billboards around town the Arizona Republicans for Harris. And then we sent out a flyer, and we did pretty well with fundraising. people found out what our cause was, and we got a flyer that went out to why a person of faith would vote for Harris, and went over some policy issues. We held some events. We got the guy from Shark Tank,
Mark
Cuban, sent us a video, our little group, talking about why, if for economic reasons, you should vote for Harris. And then we collected kind of the big names here in Arizona of Republicans. So Mesa Mayor John Giles came. There's Councilwoman Julie Spilsbury, both are Republicans. And then Stephen Richer, Maricopa County Recorder, came to this event. And we talked about why Republicans or conservatives or independents should vote for Harris. And they all gave their perspective. And what else did we do? We even had like a forum, and we focused it towards taking this idea of faith. We went after the demographic of the Latter-day Saint vote in Arizona. And we had prominent Latter-day Saint politicians and musicians. And we did this online, like a Zoom call, where people could ask questions and so forth. And we talked about why vote for Harris. But looking back now, it was maybe too cerebral, right?
What do you mean by that?
Because we were focused on, like you said, brand is an emotion.
Yeah.
And in this election, I think folks voted with emotion. Maybe the emotion was just loyalty to my party, or the emotion was something they didn't want to acknowledge. Like you said, I don't trust a woman to be the commander in chief, or the emotion was based on race. It could have been, but we went at it thinking, surely we can present the arguments, because they're there, why there's good reasons to vote for Harris as a Republican, as a conservative, as a person of faith, as a Latter-day Saint, right? We went everywhere we could. In fact, our group also did business leaders for Harris. We published this letter in almost every newspaper in Arizona, with this explanation of why business leaders should vote for Harris. And that's what I meant by it was too cerebral, where in the end, I'm not sure how much we moved the needle, because people voted for on emotional reasons that I'm not even sure they could describe.
Right. Well, and what we know to be true is that human beings are more feeling animals that think than they are thinking animals that feel. And people, and this comes up in our work at Javelina all the time, all day, every day with clients, where we really have to reinforce in our process with our clients that people make decisions based on emotion, and then they seek facts to justify their decision, not the other way around. And oftentimes what we want to do in persuasive storytelling is list facts. And, I'm not sure you actually did the wrong thing. Like, I think making sort of rational, policy-driven arguments to a targeted group that overlaps with their interests, like, that's the right thing to do. However, if the underlying emotion isn't changeable, and in this election, I don't think that it was, I'm not sure there's a single thing you could have said on a billboard or a flyer that would have really been able to change that emotion. And like you said, brand is emotion. That's what brand is. So it begs a very interesting question about how we shift the brand moving forward.
Right.
I don't know.
What's interesting is that Ruben Gallego figured it out, his campaign.
Yes.
And
yes.
And I'm not, this was not me. I was just part of this effort. But I did this TV ad. Not even, it was a video, right? So it was used on TV. It was used on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. It was all over.
And before you jump into this, just for anyone who's not familiar, Ruben Gallego ran for Senate in the federal Senate in Arizona against Kerry Lake, who is a Trump Republican. Sorry, go ahead.
So my sense is they knew they knew the brand, the logo they were after. So they took me as a Republican male who works in a wood shop. And if you've seen the ad, but the ad
many
is
times.
the ad appeals to a man, right? Doesn't it? Or anyone, because we're in a wood shop. It's got saws. We're working with wood. And I introduced myself. I'm a Republican. I'm a veteran. I'm a small business owner, and I'm voting for Ruben Gallego. And here's why. And we're walking around. The lighting's great. In fact, the campaign manager called it his Ford Tough ad, because the Ford trucks are made Ford Tough, and that was what they wanted. And they showed it on my a colleague said, yeah, I watched the Arizona Cardinals football game. It came on every commercial during that football game. So they were targeting this male audience, not just male, but clearly it feels like. And how did Ruben Gallego win in a state that went with, how did a Democrat win in a state that went with Trump?
Right.
Well, he captured the Trump voter who said to himself, yeah, Ruben Gallego's my guy. Oh, he's a Democrat. That's okay.
I think that's right. And my understanding is that the polling really showed before the election that the Trump Gallego voter, well, that was exactly it. It was like, I like this guy. Now, also worth mentioning that Gallego was running against a woman, and a woman who, other than gender, is a carbon copy of Donald Trump.
Yes.
The policies, the language, the tone. And actually, because she was a TV anchor for many years, a lot more polished than Donald Trump, and yet has lost pretty decisively in statewide office twice now in Arizona, at the same time that Donald Trump wins. And so back to sort of, I think about, there's lots and lots of reasons. I think that brand, for me, if I had to sort of sum it up in one word, it would be brand. However, unfortunately, gender and paternity is a part of that brand. And I, in my view, that is something that needs to change.
Yeah. And what was interesting to talk about getting involved in the community is that my Republicans for Harris work, my name was in there, but very little visibility. That ad, I got all sorts of feedback, and people would come onto our business website and leave Google reviews about our business and say, you can't trust this guy. These were mad Republicans because I had somehow betrayed the party in advocating to vote for Gallego. And then other folks would, I did some door walking for Harris. And this was just kind of get out the vote, right? You're knocking on doors. Have you dropped off your ballot? Do you have a plan to? Who you think about voting for? And a couple of times that I knocked on the door and they open up and they go, "You're the guy in that commercial." And
that is so interesting.
And I was, yeah, I love it. And then I did have somewhere, I can't trust a thing you say, the kind of the opposite reaction both.
Well, I want to ask you about this. But before I do, let's go to a quick ad break, and then we will be right back to talk about getting involved in your community.
Okay.
You seeking to create change at the polls? Us too. With Javelina's long history of running winning campaigns, we've learned a thing or two about mobilizing communities. And we know that success isn't about reaching every voter, it's about reaching the right voters. Head over to javelina.co today to sign up for a free consultation and learn how our tailored direct mail services bring voters into your story and drive your campaign to victory. We're back. And the thing that I want to ask you about is this idea of getting involved in your community, but also some of the divisive kind of blowback that you received. It sounds like you received both positive and negative feedback, but but maybe not extreme, but divided, right? It was like good or bad. And one of the things that I heard a lot in the aftermath of the election, mostly on social media, where there were people who have a significant following or they're famous, and they said something like, I don't get involved in politics, or I stay away from politics. And this is a thing you hear a lot. It's a refrain you hear a lot where people are like, oh, I don't do politics. And for me, it's always been such a weird thing to say, because it's like saying I don't do oxygen. Politics is everything. It's the value of your house price. It's how your garbage gets picked up. It's which roads get fixed. It's the decisions that get made in your kids' schools. It's it's not separate. And being able to sort of say, oh, I don't do politics has always struck me as so strange. And I get it, because it's divided, it's vitriolic, it's mean. And so for you, who are so involved in your community and have this passion for helping others get into community, how would you answer that sort of, I don't get involved in politics because it's nasty sentiment, which is completely legitimate?
So that's a good question. And it's how you get involved, right? So some folks think getting involved in politics is posting something on Facebook. And I think that's a terrible idea.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Because Facebook is how you're sharing your life and so forth. And it just invites, unless that's what you want, but it's inviting people to attack and criticize. And that's usually, you're just trying to state your opinion. I think you have to find the right way for you to get involved. So for me, it's not, I'm off Twitter, because that's just so negative. The Facebook, I didn't post anything on Facebook or Instagram. And instead I found different ways, like knocking doors. I was given a list of Democrats and independents. So 95% of them were just nice exchanges, inviting people to vote. Have you voted? Are you planning on a vote? What are you trying to do? Or you find an organization like Arizona Republicans for Harris, or you get involved in something that's nonpartisan. So something we haven't talked about is our local community here. The Gilbert Public School District had a budget override. And there's an organization called Unite for Arizona. Unite for Education, I think. I'm part of it. I'm trying to remember.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
But it was a nonpartisan way to get involved in what was essentially a political question, because it was going to be on the ballot and everyone was going to vote whether or not to support this budget override, which was going to have a critical impact on our local school district. It was a no-brainer vote if you could just educate people about what the issue was. It wasn't a tax increase. We're just continuing. It was a continuation of the funding that had already been approved in 2019. And we just needed to get the word out that this will improve and help keep our public school system safe and strong. That was our message. Thank you, Javelina.
But it was our pleasure.
Yes. So I think you have to figure out how to get involved and what's comfortable for you. Now, if you don't want any negative feedback, pick a nonpartisan issue like a school budget override, because it's that one just makes a stronger community. If you feel passionate about a candidate, find those activities. It's actually when you go to a meeting of like-minded political people, like when we had that event with Mayor Giles, and a video from the Shark Tank guy.
Oh, Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban. I don't know why I can't remember his name. So Mark Cuban, we had this event, and we held it. There's a venue in Mesa called the Wright House, where they often have wedding receptions. And we found out that the owner was a supporter of our cause. So we rented that out. We had 150 people there. It was just a great event. Like-minded folks, all with and it was a positive message. We had a similar viewpoint of what we thought was good for our country. It wasn't negative. It wasn't divisive. Sure, if you were a Trump supporter, you showed up there, you might not have been happy, but we didn't spend time talking about why we shouldn't vote for Trump, but we focused on the good things we thought about for that Kamala Harris represented.
Well, I really appreciate. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just think you have to. There's so many opportunities to participate. You have to find something that you're comfortable with.
Well, and I appreciate you going through that. The how, like, you know, if column A doesn't work for you, pick column B. What is your why? Why does community involvement matter to you so much?
It goes back to what you said. It's all politics, right? The quality of the education your child receives, the quality of the road that you drive on, the security you feel in your house because you have a well-funded police department, the healthcare that's available to you, how important it is to see the United States play an important role globally. Maybe you have friends overseas and you want the U.S. to be a cause for good.
Yeah.
You know, those are all. The why is easy to answer if you look for it and you understand how the world works. That may be the question, Catherine. How well do we understand how the world works? Which would be a great course to have. I think sometimes I think they do and sometimes they don't. When I hear someone say, yeah, I want to vote for Donald Trump because I want the inflation to go down or my interest rates to go down, I think, well, it's not that simple. We sometimes we oversimplify things, and then sometimes we just misunderstand how different agencies are run, like the Federal Reserve.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the cynical view of it would be that those who have power are disincentivized to really educate people about how the system truly works. That, the way it was set up from the very, very, very beginning is that it doesn't help those in power for the masses to be educated. Because the more they learn, the more they realize that they're being screwed. And so I think one of my personal mission pieces, I guess, for my career and my life is to equip people with not only the tools to make change, but the belief that they can. Because I think a lot of us are conditioned in school, but also in just political advertising and the way that politics is, to believe that we don't have agency, that even if we were to get involved, we wouldn't be able to change things. And, I think it's also unfortunate that the thing that gets the most amount of attention is the presidential election every 4 years, where there are tons and tons and tons of decisions being made at the local level, the federal level, the municipal level, that truly you can truly get involved in and make an impact and truly do change lives. And I think all of that gets glossed over by this really divisive, vitriolic event that we have every 4 years.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So how is success defined for you, John? When you think about community, we've just had this huge failure. How do you think about what is winning for you in the world of community involvement?
Well, there is some like this. Hey, I want to do my part for my kids, right? Make a better world for your own family, yeah. And that is a motivator. When the kids would say, "Where are you off to?" and I. Because in the end, I got involved in the school event, the Gallego campaign, the Harris campaign, and then there was this Prop 140. And so they'd say, "Where are you off to?" I'm going to, and I'd say to them, "I'm trying to protect your democracy." and give them a sense of ownership. Hey, this is for you. So sometimes defining success is just like feeling like I've done what I can do.
Yeah.
And the outcome I don't have control over, but I do have making a contribution. Yeah, and I think that's it for me. It's interesting. I think most people do want to be involved. Whether it's a service project for the community or something, but they lack the how. And then there's the stigma around politics that you discussed, of being so divisive. And it is, there's no doubt about it. Within my own family, I have siblings I don't talk to about what I'm up to, because I know that's just going to open up this conversation that doesn't have a lot of hope for success.
Right. Yeah.
So I understand that. But if we, I was thinking about, that's a question we often ask that question. How do we recruit more folks? In the end, our Republicans for Harris, we ended up getting over 1,000 different contributions, almost all of them local. And sometimes it was $5 and sometimes it was bigger. And I think part of it was people just wanted to feel like, hey, I'm part of this effort.
Doing something.
Yeah. And it's just a matter of that's a question. That's a great question. How do we open up the tent, so enlarge the tent so that more folks feel like, hey, I can come participate, and it's not going to be this negative experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I don't know the ultimate answer to that, but I think partially what you said is that for success for you is knowing I've done what I can do and focusing sort of on your zone of control. I think the more we could focus attention there, the more beneficial we might be. When we're looking at social change over the arc of human history, we are very, very focused on outcomes. People elected, policies driven, minds changed, where my philosophy and my sense is that the process actually is just as important, if not more important. More change is made on the way to a good outcome than the outcome itself, because the outcome itself is fleeting. For me personally, and for lots of people, the victory that was felt by Obama's election in 2008, and I reflect on how I feel now in this moment in 2024, and it feels like a backward slide. But then I reflect on all the process of being involved, not just me, but all the people that have been involved in that. I know countless people who have their entire career rests on getting involved in the Obama campaign. And so I don't know the answer, but there's something in this idea of I've done what I can do.
Yeah. And I think what you said is, just to follow up, when you become part of a cause, even if the outcome of the cause is not at that stage, at that point in time, is not successful, but the cause was still a good cause, right? There was still value in it. It will continue on, and the relationships and the energy and that momentum doesn't stop just because you lost. I think it then sets the stage for the next time there's an opportunity for an outcome, whether in that may be in 2 years or 4 years, and you've then set the stage or the foundation for a higher chance of success or a better outcome, where you just being part of the cause isn't going to go away, and that's true for us. We've now made in this group we have independents, moderates, Democrats, and Republicans who have come together where they never would have previously. And I think we're stronger than we were 4 years ago. And 4 years from now, I think we're going to be stronger then. And we'll push forward if needed, the candidate that reflects those values, that character, those moral principles that we think are needed in a presidential candidate or another candidate, right? We could pivot. And
right.
So you're right. It's all good, even though this particular outcome wasn't what we wanted on the presidential race. Now, the school one. What's interesting is in Arizona, you have to do it every 5 years, which is it's a crazy system. But we were surrounded by, so Chandler had a similar vote, Higley had a similar vote, and Gilbert. So those three school districts all voted for almost the exact same thing, the budget override. We were by far the most mobilized, put in a lot of effort, fundraising, going door to door, holding events, and so forth, getting the word out. And we were successful. The other two were not. And so what's interesting is, I'm not tuning our own horn, but what I'm doing is I think what we did gives hope to Chandler and Higley to say, we can be successful. We need to take that playbook that was used by the Gilbert School District, and then we'll get this passed. And so in there, even though they lost this outcome, I think they can look and see, okay, we'll get it next time. We just have to go about it in a different way.
Well, and toot your own horn, toot away, because what there's such a beautiful example of is how community engagement, involvement, and mobilization works. It really does. I think that what can be so disheartening after such a high level, top of the ticket loss like this one is it cuts away from this idea that we can make change. And what you are telling is this really great story of, well, we might not have made it over here, but we made it over here. And this funding, this additional funding that we passed in Gilbert School District will change, shape, and influence lives. And so I think, toot away, like it and you did it by mobilizing the community, and that's what matters the most.
Yeah, you're right.
Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
So what's next, do you think? What do the next 2 to 4 years hold for your community engagement and involvement?
Okay, so that's a good question. We've talked about the president, we talked about the center, we talked about the school. The fourth area we jumped into, or I jumped into, was this Prop 140. And that was an institutional change to how we run primary elections in Arizona. The goal being to open it up, have open primaries, and make it easier for independent candidates to run. And that was going to be the means for 2 years from now to run an independent candidate and get them elected. Now that lost
pretty handily.
Yeah, right? I think it was 60-40. Both parties came out against it. So it was an uphill battle. It was an uphill battle, even though, my gosh, they gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures and all sorts of court cases, and it had a brutal road to the ballot, but it made it, and then it got voted down. So that was going to be the next task, was to get an independent candidate, because we struggle when we in these races, either whether it's Arizona State House or for Congress, to break the primary system, which is rewarding the more extreme candidates, the ones that I think are hyper partisan, instead of putting the country or the people before the party. These are the folks that are all party, and that's why they're winning their primaries. And then the primaries are the general election is non-competitive based on how the district is drawn up. So I don't have a good answer, Catherine, because that was going to be our solution. We would love to see a more moderate, a more productive state legislature and a congressional candidate from our area. We haven't given up, but we have to figure out how And this is where I think you just have to get the right people together and you say, okay, here's our problem. How do we solve it?
I think that's right.
And we don't know how right now.
Well, and yeah, when it comes to creating a really important change in the world, you can't ever afford to lose sight of the vision and give yourself the flexibility to explore a different path to get there.
Yeah, we may be coming back to you and Avelina and saying, okay, what do you think?
Well,
yeah, it'll be interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that changing the primary system is the single biggest thing that we could do to completely revolutionize our politics and our policy across the country. I'll do a quick plug for a book. Have you read or heard of a book called The Politics Industry?
Yes.
I recommend it a lot because it's short and it's an easy read. And it essentially describes or demonstrates how our two-party system it's sort of almost like a mutually beneficial stronghold on power, and how the two-party system is incentivized to really consolidate power and not make changes that would arguably lead to better outcomes. It's a fascinating read, so I would highly recommend it.
It's Catherine. Who's the author?
Catherine
Heigl or no?
Not Catherine Heigl. She's an actress who was in Grey's Anatomy.
Wait, I've never even seen that show. I can't remember the author.
And other things. Catherine, I have the book somewhere. I'll find it and I'll put it in the outro.
Yeah, I only read part. I actually have the book and started and haven't finished it, so I need to.
It's down here somewhere. I'll find it and I'll put it in the outro. But yeah, I highly recommend it. So I've recommended it to people who are not particularly political book junkies, and they've really liked it. So
yeah, it's an interesting question. How to make an impact? Well, and there, to anybody, the school, like I said, that the school funding in Arizona, the current situation is very difficult because the district has to mobilize, go back to the voters, and make their case with whether it's a budget override or bonding.
Yeah.
And then you have this knee-jerk reaction, and this happened to us this time, from usually kind of the ultra right part of the Republican Party, unfortunately, who will say no more taxes, even though it's not a tax increase, or no, the schools, the public schools are bloated already, which is ridiculous. There's no data for that.
Right.
So that you could say, how do I help my community? You could just be on that working with public school district, because we're going to have a bond ballot initiative in a couple of years, and then it will be another budget override. And after we were done, we were like, man, I can't believe we're going to have to do it again. But in 2 or 3 years, it's like childbirth. You kind of say to yourself, okay, I haven't actually experienced that. That's what my wife tells me.
You just forget. You have to wait long enough to forget how horrendous it was, and then you won't have to do it again.
And then you're going to say, okay, let's do this again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, John, I have really enjoyed your insights and your experiences. Thank you so much for joining us today. To wrap us up, I want to ask you, for anyone who's been listening and is intrigued by a conversation about getting more involved and more active in their community, what is one place you might point them to so they can learn more about this idea?
As a business owner, the Gilbert Chamber of Commerce, or any Chamber of Commerce, has a forum by which business interests, you don't even have to be a business owner, actually. Anyone in the business, you can join that forum, and they provide this bridge to the local political leadership at the city level, at the state level, even in Congress. And it's focused on how can our government entities ensure that we have a strong economic base for our community. So that's an easy one. if you're just interested in economics. The other one is with a school. If you have kids in school, the PTO is also the same idea, where parents become this bridge and become tied to the school administration and get tied into what are the issues in school funding. And that's a powerful way to figure out that the public school system relies on strong support from not only the legislature, but from the local community. They have to get funding from both sources, and these PTOs are a good option to find the means. And then congressional races, when I moved to Arizona after I retired from the military, I became a precinct committeeman in the local Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And initially it was a very those were interesting meetings, because it's held in like a local school. You're with your neighbors. It's geographically based. And then they would, once a month we would meet and we would talk to local civic leaders about what was going on and those who were running campaigns. Unfortunately, the Republican Party in Arizona, I don't want to end on a negative note, so maybe you can ask me a second question, but the Republican Party in Arizona has swayed so far from its principled roots, so that the more extreme you are, the more just kind of nastiness and demagoguery. That's not the right word, is it?
Are you trying to? Yeah.
Where you're playing to people's passions and their kind of these unsubstantiated emotions about the border and this othering of us versus them. That's what's going on in those meetings. And I had, after many years, I just had to stop going, because it turned so caustic. It was just this negative and antagonistic feeling about how horrible Democrats were, and I was like, we're just, and that is by design. There's groups like Turning Point USA that they thrive on that. That's why they're involved. They kind of stir up this anger and, the liberals hate America, so we've got to go out there and stop them. Instead of a kind of a civic dialogue of, hey, let's figure out a better policy approach to this issue and see if we can get a candidate that can represent it. Anyway, so I used to recommend that on that level, but I don't recommend that anymore.
Well, to sort of related to that, and maybe to enable us to finish on a positive note, is when you think about how people who've been listening can think about getting involved in their community, another angle to consider, what is something you'd suggest?
Another angle to suggest on how to get involved in community?
Yeah. Other
than Chamber of Commerce, the local PTO, definitely we need good candidates. So it's interesting that both at the city level, at the school district, they've formed these kind of citizen committees that need folks that just have sound judgment to sit on them and listen to what are the proposals and help make decisions and recommendations. That's kind of the lower level. If you're willing to, we need folks to run for office. I have not run, but I'm inspired by the people that are willing to run, especially, and these are first timers for state legislature or school board or city council. These folks it's not the pay, because often there
Certainly not
isn't
the
any,
pay.
or it's minimal. It's just
Yep.
a desire to make a difference. And
Mhm.
I'm inspired by them. So either supporting one of those campaigns or running yourself. It's interesting. Something I hadn't heard about much was just these house parties that we would.
Mhm.
And I would go to a few of them and talk about the school budget override, and just so impressive. So someone would just invite friends and family and say, "Hey, come on over." It was often it was in the evening or Saturday morning. Come on over. I'm going to have someone come talk about this issue, which is going to be on the ballot. I just want us to learn more. I'm just trying to educate, get us all so we understand these questions that we all are asked to vote on, so we can make the right decision. How
Yeah.
cool is that? And then they invited us over, or I would come over and talk about the budget override. But that's a great way. Just be one of those uh, folks in your neighborhood that's, hey, how can I help us all figure out what's best for our community? Because that ballot is coming every 2 years, man, and
Every
sometimes
2 years, and sometimes in between.
in between. And we need to be informed, so we're making the best decisions for our community. So I think that's a great way too.
That's awesome. Well, John, thank you so much for sharing your personal story, your personal motivations, and just sharing some ideas of how people can really get involved in their local community and why it matters. And I wish you every luck in turning around this little country of ours.
Well, thanks, Catherine. It was a lot of fun to talk to you and hear your insights. So thank you.
Thank you. We have another incredible conversation about how to make change in the world. I really enjoyed my conversation with John, and I hope that you got something meaningful out of it as well. Perhaps my favorite part was when we were talking about how you make change. When I asked John, there is some resistance to getting involved in politics because it can be really mean and nasty and vitriolic. And he said, it has to come down to what it looks like for you and how your community involvement shapes up. If you want to stay away from social media, stay away from social media. If partisan politics isn't for you, that's absolutely fine. But find an issue, an area, a sector, an organization that really lights you up and give some time and some energy. And I really just loved that way of thinking. For those of you that are curious, we were talking about the book, The Politics Industry, and it's by Catherine Gehl, Gehl. I think I'm pronouncing that right, or I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Michael Porter. I read this a few years ago, and I have recommended it to many, many a person since. It really does a very good job of explaining some of the problems that are baked into how our current political system is structured and what it looks like to change those, and how or what you can do as an active, concerned citizen to make a difference. So I highly recommend The Politics Industry. And then I also want to share a review. If you have liked this episode, if you enjoy the How to Change the World podcast, I would love it if you would review the show on whatever platform that you listen to podcasts. It really, really helps us grow. Somebody left a review, insl.us, left a review. Love the show. I love the stories you help share. They also provided some constructive feedback on our audio editing, so I'll look into that. So thank you so much for listening. And until next time, when I cannot wait to share another story of change with you, I hope you have a great one.